Placebo effect, a response to a placebo manifesting in the reduction of symptoms or the occurrence of expected effects. The mind can convince a person that a treatment has a real therapeutic effect. In some cases, the placebo exerts a significant influence comparable to that of actual medication. Boomerang effect, a situation in which the result of a persuasive message is the opposite of what was intended. In other words, a person begins to think or act in a way completely contrary to what they were told. If something is forbidden, it often triggers increased interest. Spotlight effect, a cognitive bias where people believe that others are paying more attention to them than they actually are. This prejudice stems from a tendency to always feel like the center of attention, manifesting in both positive and negative situations. Imposter syndrome, a psychological phenomenon where a person is unable to internalize their accomplishments, attributing them to luck rather than their own qualities, abilities, and efforts, despite external evidence of their competence. People suffering from this syndrome remain convinced that they are frauds and do not deserve the success they have achieved.
Telescoping effect, a concept in cognitive psychology referring to a temporal displacement of events, where people perceive recent events as being more distant in the past and distant events as being more recent than they actually are. Ringleman effect, the tendency for individual productivity to decline as the size of a group increases. The more people involved in a task, the lower the average performance becomes, as each participant feels that their own efforts are not decisive.
Pluralistic ignorance, a phenomenon where people mistakenly believe that others hold an opinion different from their own. In this situation, the majority of a group may publicly agree with a point of view they do not personally hold because they falsely assume that everyone else in the group supports it. Stockholm Syndrome, a term describing a defensive, unconscious bond or a reciprocal, one-sided sympathy that develops between a hostage and their captor during the process of kidnapping or under the threat of violence. Under the influence of intense emotional distress, hostages may begin to sympathize with their captors, justify their actions, and ultimately identify with them. Pygmalion effect, a psychological phenomenon where high expectations lead to improved performance in a given area, while low expectations lead to a decline in results. Ambiguity effect, a cognitive bias where decision-making is influenced by a lack of information or ambiguity. The effect implies that people tend to choose options for which the probability of a favorable outcome is known, rather than options where the probability is unknown. False uniqueness effect, a type of cognitive bias describing how people tend to view their qualities, character traits, and personal characteristics as unique, when in fact they are not. Individuals feel more comfortable if they perceive themselves as unique. Curse of Naleg, a psychological phenomenon where it is extremely difficult for informed people to view a problem from the perspective of less informed individuals. For example, an expert professor may no longer recall the difficulties a young student faces when first learning a new subject.